Okay.
But Frank,
Hi, Victor. It's been a long time. How you doing?
well, Stella has happened. Stella magazine, I noticed there's been a lot of criticism of it by people don't like lists.
Oh,
People like Sam Reynolds has gone, even though he's on the list, yes, it is a bit arbitrary, but it's not entirely arbitrary. I did this social influence list, you see, in astrology, and it's meant to be a bit of fun. And you will be on a future list, Frank.
I don't imagine so. I really don't work on that level. Quite,
Ah,
but you're talking about the Instagram most popular people online, that sort of thing. Yeah.
sort of thing.
It reminded me of when Amazon have new books, people share that it's number one in the Amazon chart. And I think somebody in Amazon has fun with that because I've had my books say they're number one and they've not even sold a copy yet because they haven't been released. So it's one of those interesting mercurial plays that we have online. I think any list like that is always interesting. So it reminded me of that, and I imagine there are some people that should have been on that list of most popular online astrologers and other people that maybe shouldn't have been. Who knows? Who
Well,
knows? But it obviously stirred the pot.
the thing is, Frank, it, what people didn't seem to realize was they didn't bother to read the magazine. I noticed one mischievous rival of mine said, "Oh, it's the online magazine," but failing to mention the title. So I reminded her with the link. But the point is, when you're trying to measure social influencing, it's not just about the numbers of followers, because some of the largest followed people actually are not very influential. Because I'm thinking in terms of books and teaching and range and stuff like that. Take yourself, for example. I know you're not very active, say, on X, but on the other hand, you've got your books, you're a teacher, everybody knows Frank C. Clifford, you're mega famous in Mexico and China. I mean, and all that stuff. And of course, to a Mercury dominated person like myself, this is very interesting because, as you yourself have said, in astrology, it's the teachers and writers who run the show.
Well, you hope so. I mean, you hope it's the ones that are teaching you astrology in an ethical way. But yeah, wherever you go, I mean, astrology has had this battle for years, hasn't it? With ever since we can blame Princess Margaret for that, can't we? Uh,
what does she do, the poor woman?
Well, 1930 was the first horoscope profile that Naylor did, and it was on Princess Margaret,
Of
and then it
course.
encouraged the weekly or the daily sun sign columns to come out. So there's probably there's 100-year anniversary coming up for that. So that's something to think about for Stella and for the AA Journal. But it's been a long time that astrology has done battle with that, and I'm in quite happily being a Gemini ascendant, quite happily in both camps. I think it was sun sign astrology serves a great purpose to get people to think about where they're at. If it's written well, then it gives people food for thought of things to actively participate in your life. And then I'm a great fan of going deep and really exploring the subject beyond that. So, but I know people like Dennis Elwell always said there was a small place in hell waiting for people who did sun sign columns, or maybe even the ones who read them as well.
I never knew Dennis Elwell, but I suspect he was a man of some perversity, although obviously clever, in the sense that although, of course, he had a go at sun sign columnists, he wrote one of the best essays on the solar scope
Yes.
and celebrated it. Of course, what he didn't like was the banal interpretation, but then, as Marshall McLuhan once said, the medium is the message. So you're not going to be writing an essay for Titbits or whatever it's called these days, Hello Magazine or whatever.
Well, I know you do your column for the lady, and when I did mine over the years, and I wrote weeklies and monthlies for about 13, 14 years for different magazines, and found that it was a really good opportunity to be a bossy Aries in 50 words or 75 words, because you could say something that you wouldn't say to a client, like, try this, or you wouldn't tell
Yeah.
what to do. But in a short thing, you could say, use the new moon or the full moon on the 15th as an opportunity to do the following. And it'd be
Yeah.
a piece of advice. And you don't have to follow it. It's not predicting the color red and the number nine being important in your life this week. It's actually using the chart to give you something to do. So I'm a big fan of
Oh, no, I
being
love it.
using it as a bossy thing to say, try that out, give that a go. Isn't it time you did this? Yeah.
I mean, you may have mentioned the sad passing of Michael Luton. Of course, pulled off the biggest trick of all. He managed to hold a column for years on one of the biggest magazines in the world, Vanity Fair, which has nothing to do with astrology.
Yeah. And when they, I don't know, the contract ended, or I don't know what happened at the
I
end.
do.
Oh, you do? Okay. Are you going to share that, or like,
Yes. But you
okay.
carry on. You carry on with your
Oh,
thing.
well, all I know is that there was tremendous uproar, and people wrote in, and it was a bit like when Neil Spencer ended his column on in the Observer. It was,
Yes.
I mean, that you never really know how popular something is until people start complaining and writing in that it's no longer there. I think Shelley von Strunkel has had that many a time over the years when people, I think new editors have no idea that this part is something for people and it's personal. It's not about the Vanity Fair celebrity or the latest Annie Leibovitz shoot. It's about a moment with yourself. So spill the beans, Gemini.
Well, before I get to that, I just want to say about Shelley, who I now love, of course, thanks to you. Do you remember that we did that interview with her and my tape recorder broke down? But the great thing about Shelley von Stroh, this is the best bit. The editor who got rid of her was herself fired 2 weeks later, which I take to be poetic justice in the cosmos.
Indeed.
But
I
sorry.
I know you've been in that environment for many years. It's a cutthroat business. I think in some ways it's worse than the music industry. It's just very tough publishing, particularly magazines and tabloids. It's dog eat dog. So yes, yes, she's
Shelley
the
was
same
replaced
thing.
by a stupid agony aunt, you know, and I thought, oh, you could have both, they could coexist. You know,
Well,
people made up problems and then you deal with the real world.
it's all about space. My first column I had with Reveal, not my first ever column, but it was the launch of the magazine. They had me on a double page spread. It was fantastic, paid well, and then they used that extra page for advertising. So my fee was
Okay.
halved, and then they did ask me to talk sex and shagging and when people, all of that. And I thought, well, probably time to leave. And they replaced me with a friend of the editor who was a tarot reader rather
Oh.
than an astrologer. So that happens all the time. And
It's
you do one,
bizarre.
it doesn't really matter who replaces you
But
because the public
the,
don't necessarily know the difference.
the story about Luton, he himself told me this because
Ah,
we sort of bonded in a kind of distant sort of way, which is the way I like it usually. Because in other ways, he's a bit of a nutcase, I felt, but he was a very clever nutcase. But he told me how they got rid of him. He'd written that brilliant essay back in 2006 about Pluto going into Capricorn. And of course, it's proven to be highly prophetic. A lot of the things that happened. But the thing is, he had to negotiate to get that essay in because Graydon Carter, the then editor, wasn't too keen on devoting many pages to an astrological essay. So they traded it off. He said, I won't do the star sign column to release some space for this essay. But the problem was, although the essay went down very well, and people, there was a lot of response to it, but also the atheists and the secularists and the Christopher Hitchens raised up against him and criticized Graydon Carter for publishing it in the first place. But one thing led to another. One day, as Michael Luton was resting in his apartment somewhere, a little note was tucked under the door, and that was his dismissal notice.
wow.
Somebody had gone to the bother of getting into his block and putting a sad little note. There was no warning, nothing. The magazine never acknowledged his departure. And of course, there was a hell of a row. And since then, Graydon Carter, I mean, he was a good editor in other respects, but a bit of a shit, I think, as a human being, if you don't mind my saying. And then, you know, the subsequent editor hasn't thought to bring back astrology. But that's the sad thing. Once it goes, it goes.
Yes, it's very difficult to get it back. People get used to that. Well, that's a great shame. I didn't know that story, and it's a great shame when there was no thank you, not even
No,
a.
thank you. He had been, and quite frankly, he was one of the big reasons why I read the magazine because he managed to tuck a lot of humor. He managed to be rather cryptic as well. He played with the audience. He played a game, and maybe only in the last line, you give you a bit of astrology. He used to chuck it in. I think perhaps just like throwing a sardine at a dolphin or something like that. Almost like there are other things to address, but we'll tuck in a bit of astrology at the end.
And I think that I mean, Jonathan Cainer had a column that went on flights of fancy and
Oh yes.
imagine you've left the kitchen oven on and that sort of thing, and very little astrology attached to that as well. But it appealed, and it certainly uh, I think it seemed to support people's maybe editors' idea of what astrology is and what it does. It tells a story rather than anything else. Yeah,
I
but
do understand when people have a go at me about the sun sign astrology, but then I say, well, Nick Campion was a sun sign astrologer on the Mo. I mean, lots of prominent astrologers, including yourself, have done or do sun sign astrology. I mean, even Geoffrey Cornelius, bless his heart, he wrote sun sign astrology for teenage girls under a
right.
pseudonym. So, and I've learned that just the other day from Gary Phillipson. So, I mean, we've made our point, haven't we?
Yeah, I think there's an art to writing 50 meaningful words or 75. I have a huge respect for people that do that because it takes a lot to write something that's going to be meaningful, succinct, and hopefully on point. And people can't do that. For years, I used to edit the AA conference blurbs for the conference program. And Wendy would send them in and say, there's nothing to edit really. Everybody on the council has already looked through this. And I'd spend 13 hours editing almost 1,000 corrections that no one had ever noticed. And I used to think, wow, there's an art to it because you'd get people who wrote very good blurbs and then they'd give a lecture that was just appalling because there are a lot of crappy teachers and lecturers out there that really should be in a box or back at home talking to themselves or learning how to do it rather than thinking they can. It's appalling. Or you'd get this diatribe that what lasted twice as long as it should do. That was absolute nonsense, and I'd end up cutting it down and then hoping in some way that it matched. And I think, as you know, as a good editor, you can do that, and people reread it and think that's what they've written.
Come
And
across it so often.
there is a bit of gossip with this. Maybe I shouldn't leave this for a video that's going to go places, but my, this happened with Michael Lutin. He did a article for me on the very first Mountain Astrologer that I guest edited, and I invited different people. I think it was 2012 or 11, something, or maybe 2010, and it needed a lot of work, and it was unrecognizable by the time that I put it together. And I got an email from him a few months later saying, "I'm putting a new book together. This article really." Would belong there perfectly. And I thought, actually, you didn't write this article, Michael, but I
I,
edited it beyond. I mean, you would, yeah, you wouldn't recognize it. And I sent it to him, and I thought, it's certainly gonna stand out in your book because it's not your voice. It was as much as I could do to bring it together. So, yeah, he was obviously good at doing the short pieces. Yeah,
and then you'd get some writers, you notice a semicolon's been changed to a comma. So, you're not going to please everybody. But
no,
I am afraid I have come across this phenomenon where, I mean, I've got to the point now where if the piece is not half right, it goes back to the author. I used to, when the early days of editing journal, I used to laboriously rewrite. But then because I wasn't getting any appreciation, although in the end, the appreciation is you've got a professional piece in the magazine. But I just thought, well, why am I doing this? Anyway, that's beside
well,
the
I remember the only time you ever came back to me on something was when I'd written about the alleged antics of Obama in the back of a.
yes, I remember that.
Remember that? And I'd written about the man that had written this book about having a
Yes.
sexual encounter with Obama, and you were back saying we can't possibly put this in, and but like it's going to have to go. And I said fine, and you were quite shocked that I was. I thought, well, you're the barrister, you're the legal mind, you know what to do, and
I put it in now because he's not sued anybody. I mean, it's become.
well, you put it in such a great way. You said, and he goes on to describe things that we couldn't possibly mention here in the journal. It was some brilliant line that you added as a moment. I thought that was very good. But
Well, I had to take a deep breath to write that to you. You do realize that because
oh,
we cannot lose Frank Clifford, but
oh
we
God,
have to have him in the magazine.
really? Okay. Well, I don't know, but no, I really appreciated that because you do get carried away with
Well, I
things.
do. I
Yeah,
do.
well, I do, and I got carried away with the detail on that with poor old Obama. But anyway, it was an interesting article.
Can we remind people about it, or should we just move on? Because a lot of people won't know about Obama's interesting background sexually.
Well, we don't know, do we? We do know the love letters that he wrote. They
He
came out.
certainly wrote interesting letters of
Yeah.
affectionate kind.
Yes.
You realize how I'm sort of editing as you go along.
I'm a fan of the behavior panel, the four guys that do the body language. Have you
Oh,
seen?
yes.
Yes, they're brilliant, and I'm sure they get a lot of flack for not having a woman on, but and it seems like a boys' club, but it's a great boys' club, and they did the body language of the guy that wrote the book, whose name escapes me right now, but it was they do some very interesting videos on that. So yeah,
Now, one of the reasons why we decided to catch up on each other, apart
yes,
from the pleasure of our company and seeing all this Geminian energy, blah, 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 is that we interacted the other day on Facebook about the US election. And I was going on about, well, because the only good thing going for Trump, so far as I was concerned, was that he had Uranus on his MC. But then I chose to interpret that as the possibility that Uranus would do what Uranus does, which is fail to provide what you expected. And there were other things going on in his chart as well. In fact, the point I tried to make, and then you brought in other observations, was that if you are heavily biased in the first analysis, when you're actually looking at the charts, then the likelihood is the chart will seem to reflect what you want to see. And so I was going to say to you, this is a bit of a sort of mea culpa, it's self-flagellation, whereas, because I'm trying to learn from experience. I always try to learn from failure, people, and I've seen some wonderful interactions on Facebook. There's two, I won't name them, two major astrologers having a ding dong at the moment. It's F you, F you, F you. And I'm thinking, wow, these people, they could be priests, but they're effing and blinding at each other because one got it right and the other got it wrong.
yeah. It's yeah, it's very frustrating, and it doesn't look good on the outside. It doesn't look good from the inside either. It doesn't, when people are arguing with each other. And yeah, they are the I don't know who they are actually at the moment. You'll have to tell me later. But they're yeah, they are the priests of whatever, just without the teenage boys, I guess. But they are, they're there and as figureheads, and people get it wrong. Astrology. Yeah, it's a symbolic language, and we spend our lives trying to decipher the meaning of that language. And politics, elections are the toughest to do because of that bias, as you say, that idea of, oh, let's look for something because it's about time, or somebody else has said something, or, and it's interesting about the Uranus on Trump's midheaven because it's been back and forth. The last time it was on, Mercury was there, and then we had the ruling, the indictment. There was a lot of stuff going on happening. Mars joined it later, and there was the shooting past his ear, all of that. And but what I heard that next morning from everybody, the political commentators and crying, wailing people online, on television, and everything else, was the unexpectedness of it. And
Mm.
for a lot of us, we don't think there's nothing unexpected about that in a sense because he's in the running. It's either him or her. But the whole idea of this remarkable comeback that feels incredibly Uranian, and that was one of the things that did it for me. I know Jupiter also. You felt that it was important as I did as well in that getting his message across.
Yeah, I mean, bang on his sun, North Node, Uranus, all that stuff. I mean, and also, I looked at the draconic transits for the election, and where there is draconic Jupiter sitting on his Uranus in the 10th, and that's when I got depressed, Frank. Because there is a visceral engagement with the subject. And the one point I wanted to make to you is that even when the damn thing's screaming at you, the message, you think and you'll think, well, maybe I'm reinterpreting, or maybe it won't, because Jupiter can be unreliable, as Maurice Fernandez said the other day, and you may have said it too. Jupiter doesn't always necessarily mean wonders. There can be a miscalculation if you haven't got perspective right. So, I mean, you're trying to factor in these other considerations.
I think that can be a problem, though, thinking it doesn't deliver. And of course, we know Jupiter can just be a lot of hot air in people's lives, but we know the participation is the key. And if you're being Jupiter, if you're making promises, and the thing about Trump is that whatever you think of him, he's a winner in the eyes of many people. He's a success in spite of the alleged bankruptcies or the different businesses or whatever you think of, and the convictions of all sorts of kinds. He's a winner, and Jupiter loves winners. And that, to
Good
me, is
point.
that ability to present the
Yeah.
confidence, the larger than life. And he embodied that during that time. He's embodied different aspects of who he is over the last 80 years, 70 odd years. But at the moment, in a way, to win that, had I been his astrologer, I would have said, embody Jupiter. So it works for you. Yeah, embody it in that sense. And we know it was near Kamala's ascendant as well. Uranus was on her Jupiter. There were different signs. But my grandfather worked and lived in Chicago, probably 100 years ago. I'm not sure. As a dentist, trained there, and that was his start as a professional. And I never met him. He died many years before I was born. He always said the only, and this may be controversial, but the only failure, the only crime in America is to fail. And that was his judgment back then of America. Growing up, I think in the 20s and with the whole era. And yeah, I think there's Trump comes across as somebody that will succeed for
Mm.
many people, in spite of everything, in spite of himself, in spite of the outrageous attacks, the touchiness he's got with the tweets, all the different things he does. In spite of that, there's that image. Oh, he's a businessman. He'll do a deal. He'll stand up to Putin. He'll do this. And that's what people go for. Look at the election with Corbyn a few years ago. There was this tremendous surge for Corbyn. And then people thought, hang on a minute, do I want him talking to Trump? Do I want him
Yes.
shabby
Yeah.
outfit coming in and doing that? And people at the end of the day want somebody that, even if they don't like or agree with, they want somebody that's tough enough to
Mm.
fight for the
Mm.
country. And that's what he promised. Whatever you think about him, and I'm not pro-Trump, just that idea. I
No,
think that's
but what you're doing is you're stepping outside the maelstrom in a sense and just observing the dynamics that try to explain. I mean, I'm quite interested in the draconic chart, his natal draconic. Uranus moves into Pisces, which is actually is even more emblematic of Uranus in Gemini, the tropical system, because for the simple reason that to me Pisces potentially it is in a sense take us into a place of unconventional boundaries, or no boundaries at all. It's almost like Wild West territory. And it's very interesting. Somebody wrote a very good essay about Trump some time back in Byline Times, where she connected him very nicely with the myth of the country, the Lone Ranger, the cowboy, the man who trots in like Clint Eastwood into a town, shoots it up, and then goes home. And he is a bit like that. He plays to that mythical impression. So
yeah.
interesting.
And it's what I think the 2020 was interesting because there was such a surge to get him out. But yeah, and who knows about the rigging and the voting, and everyone's bringing that up again in terms of 17 million votes missing. There's a lot of stuff. People are very injured and very upset, and I totally understand that. I also think that people are entitled to their opinion and their posts without engaging in war with each other as well. That always amazes me. I'm reading everything. I'm reading people's attitudes to things. I've got one Facebook friend who appears to say outrageous things that are pro-Trump, and people respond. And I just think, my Mercury and my Gemini side of me thinks, why can't you live with the duality of that? Without being so invested in arguing a point. I find that very strange. Do you find that odd, or do you get involved as well? How do you
I
feel?
think I'm involved. I mean, being a proper Gemini, on the one hand, I do get involved, but then another part of me steps back and says, what am I getting involved in? And then when I see all this militancy and all this divisiveness, another part of me takes over and says, well, this is not really what we're about. And of course, the other thing is that if you've got any sense, if you're very aware of the person's politics, then you will be naturally dubious about their forecast or about their analysis, because they will slant all the possibilities within an alignment or whatever, or position, towards their prejudice. There's a person, I won't name her currently, she's got her own podcast show. And she'd been saying, oh, it's in, Harris is going to win. She's going to be a two-term president, blah, blah, blah. And every time she held up her cards and tarot and then astrology as well. But what I loved about her is she shuffles it. She asks, will Trump win? Will Trump win? And even before she's opened the deck to read the cards, she gives you the answer.
Oh, okay.
And then, so the reading is just like a
as well.
confirmation of what she's picked up psychically, maybe.
Oh, yes.
Now, I'm having a bit of a giggle, but the point of the matter is she's not doing herself any favors. In my case, I just looked at the solar returns and I thought that his looked pretty tough, but then I saw some rather good aspects too, and hers wasn't much better. And so on a balance of probabilities, I just thought, well, let's give it to Harris. But the truth of the matter is I was in denial because I've looked at the Draconic. And when you've got Jupiter on Uranus, and bearing in mind he's a Uranian character, he's got his sun close to Uranus, he is the embodiment of Uranus. So all the things we may say are bad about Uranus, the volatility and the unpredictability, actually works to his favor. It's almost like you're entering another law of physics.
Indeed. And it's a bit like buying into the idea that he's anti-establishment.
Yes.
Which is what everybody is feeling, that he's going to get. This is how he defeated Hillary. She's crooked. She's been
yes. Yes.
Everybody sells their soul at least half a dozen times on the way to being American president. I'm amazed at that. Yeah. Yeah.
The only comfort I would give people, I quickly looked at the Pluto in Aquarius ingress thing for the 19th of November. And it's quite interesting. Look at the transit, South Node sitting directly on his Neptune. What could that mean?
Yeah. Well, that's interesting. Yeah, because Michael Lutin, speaking of Michael Lutin, apparently said that Trump wouldn't finish the presidency. He said that to it was posted on my Facebook by somebody. I think it was Madeline Aslan. So that's interesting. I think he's got the midheaven reach Pluto. It's the resurgence. It's the power,
yes.
the power back. But it's also being dogged by the system as well. Pluto doesn't come along and simply empower you. I watched an Oprah election special with 4 different astrologers. A couple of them I knew, a couple of them I didn't, and they all predicted Harris. The astrology in it was flimsy at best. I was amazed. I was looking for something, and I was actually going to post. I'm pleased I didn't. I was going to post on Facebook. Can anyone please show me what it is in Harris's chart that would suggest a win? Because I can't see it. Yeah, I was going to post that weeks ago because I couldn't see it. I couldn't see anything. And it's not, I think I mentioned to you or somewhere, I mentioned when John Kerry was running for president in 2004, everyone was well, not everyone, a lot of people were predicting a win for him because on the day of the election, he had Venus conjunct Jupiter on his midheaven. Now, that to me is the highlight of his life. His obituary.
As far as he goes.
Yeah, the obituary will say he was a presidential runner-up or ran for presidency in 2004, whenever it was. And that's a Venus-Jupiter transit where everybody is shouting your name. You've got thousands of people voting, millions of people voting for you. I'd take that any day. Obviously, not enough to
get him over the thing. The thing I looked at Harris's chart, what interesting, because Jupiter is retrograde in all the charts, of course. But what I thought it was quite significant that it was retrograde away from her ascendant, and that's the thing that most worried me when I was looking at the forecast chart. It's not just where it's where it is that can matter, not just its condition, all the rest of it. Yes. But going back to the earlier point I was saying to you, you go into a kind of denial. You're arguing with the horoscope, basically. Yeah. Because you'll know that you get an instinctive feeling as you're looking at the chart as well. But I decided to argue with the chart.
Good. Well, it's better than arguing with yourself as a Gemini, which I imagine happens a lot. But Yeah, so I couldn't see anything in her. Now, the thing is, we're not looking for wonderful, beautiful aspects in somebody's chart becoming the president. It must be one of the toughest jobs in the world because not only have you got the pressure on a daily level for possibly 18, 20 hours a day, and when you're sleeping as well, but you've also in it, and it's intense, and you've got criticism from every angle. You really are talking, you're looking for Pluto and Saturn activity because it's one of the hardest jobs in the world, and nobody's ever really fully pleased. And it's that you're doing battle every day of your life for those 4 years. So the idea of expecting something beautiful to be happening to Harris's chart or looking for a better soul of a turn, I'd be looking for the toughest because of the responsibility, because of the difficulties ahead. It looks like one of the toughest jobs in the world. So the chart should reflect that, in my
I
opinion.
think that's a wonderful insight. I've not actually heard anyone else put it quite like that, where you're kind of relativizing the understanding of what it is that you're up against.
Oh, you have
You
to.
know?
Yeah, it's not about winning the contest. It's about what you do. It's like, getting a job is fantastic, but what does the job entail?
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah,
and
yeah.
and this is what people didn't seem to look at. And this is why I couldn't, for the life of me, in spite of arguing with the chart, find anything in her chart that suggested that. Now, 4 years from now, she's got some big Saturn activity that people have pointed to already, saying that she wouldn't be re-elected. Ha ha. But it's, yeah, who knows where she'll be then? But I think she's had her shot,
Mhm,
and
mhm.
lost it.
I think she's done
And it
myself.
doesn't matter as well. It's like who, in many ways, often when it's between two men, who's the tallest candidate? That's something as ridiculous as that goes on. Who's the one that looks, the biggest that would win in a fight? I mean, it sounds ridiculous, but it's got that quality to it. Elections, it's who's the more attractive of the two. These things come in massively, and I guess the chart is not going to be able to say those things, but it will talk about the 4 years ahead. So Trump has an interesting time ahead, but people have voted for his charisma, uniqueness, nerve, and talent, shall we say?
Mm.
And and they're certainly going to get that.
There- it's going to be interesting. Look, Frank, it's wonderful catching up with you. Also, we ought to do it on a monthly basis. We call it the Frank and Vic show or something hideous.
Something like that.
I was going to ask you a question, but I don't know whether I should ask you it. I don't know whether I should.
Go
But
on then. We know you want to.
anyway,
Yes, yes, they're real.
well,
Is that what you're
but
going to ask?
you don't have to answer the
Real.
but obviously the mountain astrologer,
Yeah.
I love the mountain. I mean, and of course it was desperately sad that the print edition has come to an end. But there are still questions, and you may not be able to answer this question now, but there appears to be an ongoing something going on about the digital rights to TMA. And I don't know whether in some way, shape, or form a Plutonian influence may exist to enable a second coming of TMA.
I hope so. I hope so. I don't have any news for you at the moment, but I might be one of the first to hear simply because I've been involved now since 2008, 2009. I think in 2008 I wrote my first article for them, and I've written for every issue since. And I remember, speaking of elections, when Tem was around, and I really did love Tem. He was one of a kind, and he managed to be in the community without being part of all the crap that the community tends to create at times. And so that's why he was beloved, really, in that way. He put on the cover, Will Hillary, this is before the election of 2016, and it was done as a slot machine. And it was like three Hillarys coming up in a row, like they do with
Oh,
the slot
yes.
machine. And it said something like, "Will Hillary be a one-term president?" Simply because of the 2020 Jupiter Uranus beginning, and it felt like a new era after.
Yeah, yeah.
And he said the people that complained, unsubscribed, wrote him filthy messages for even having that on the cover. It didn't say Hillary will win, but the implication was if she does, will she be a one-term president?
Yes, yeah.
And I remember him writing to me, and we had used to have monthly chats as well on Zoom. And he was astonished at the vitriol that that created. And it was a provocative cover. You could probably Google it and find it. It was a really great cover.
I think
But
I remember it actually.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, and it it really wasn't partisan, but the people that were upset by it are the people that were upset by it. So it's interesting. I think that was the first time he'd ever really dealt with a wave of animosity that really was
There's a lot of fury out there, and a lot of people in astrology who shouldn't be in astrology, or if they should be, they're not really getting it. They're not quite understanding what it is that we're supposed to be doing. Not amplifying. I mean, I'm speaking to myself when I say this, by the way, not using the chart as an amplification of one's own thoughts and getting so viscerally involved in things. But I can say that because I'm sort of not bipolar in the nicest sense. I can actually detach myself quite easily and step out of myself, and all the fury that was there suddenly disappears.
Oh yes, yes. Well, it's people are still hurting, and I again, like you, I can see both sides and feel for both sides and understand that some people are extremely happy and other people are extremely upset. And but yeah, getting involved in social media wars about it always feels like a terrible waste of energy.
Mm.
But it's a channel for people to direct their anger, their impotence, their frustration with the life, the whole range of things. And that's why if I ever see anything that really annoys me, I'll either unfriend because I don't want to read racist things, I don't want to read homophobic things, I don't want to read uh, uh, ignorance in that sense. But matters of opinion of political stuff, it's fine. I just refuse to comment, and I rarely comment on things unless it's a positive comment thanking somebody or liking something. Otherwise, it's just nasty, and it's the worst of it. And we astrologers are not perfect, but ideally, the language of the heavens should give us a perspective, an understanding that we are all unique. We see the world differently. We all have the same planets in our chart, the same signs in our chart. We just have a different mix. And that quality of, oh, that person is just being who they are. And I've said this, I didn't say this in America recently, though, but I say this to the students. With Trump, as you say, he's being truly Uranian. He's being divisive. He's waking you up. And in the article that I've just submitted for the journal, I say seek out all the Uranian people that disturb you.
That's a
Have a
great bit of
listen.
advice.
Have a
Great.
listen to Andrew Tate, if you can. Have a listen to Andrew Tate and see what he's saying, and see what it makes you want to do.
Yeah.
Does it make you want to join him? Does it make you want to think, that this is what we're up against? It's the same with Trump. It's the same with Jordan Peterson. It's the same with any of the people that are stirring up controversy. Kelly Jean Keen, who
Keen. Yeah. Yeah.
Kelly Jean King or I forget her name now, Parker Posey Parky, whichever one she is. She's fascinating. We've got her chart. She's fascinating to study because what she's doing is truly Uranian and she's upsetting people, waking people up. Germaine Greer is another fabulous example
Oh,
of that. Yeah.
beautiful woman.
Whether you disagree, I mean, Piers Morgan is fascinating. I like watching Piers Morgan because I just think, oh my God, sometimes, or just leave him alone, or can't you see who you are, whatever. They're all things I think about him. But at the same time, he engages me without,
Mhm.
I don't fall asleep with these people. And Uranian people are here to wake us up. So I would say to everyone, engage with the people that drive you crazy,
Yeah.
get involved, and to decide what you're going to do about it. Don't just sit there moaning about things for 4 years. Decide what you're going to do about changing the life around you. That's my son Uranus talking. Yeah.
Well, I think it's great advice, Frank. I think that I hope people are listening. I think you're setting a great example. I think we'll end it there now. I think we've gone over our time, but it's been, as ever, a tremendous pleasure to catch up with you. It's been too long
We'll
and
do it again.
fabulous.
Yeah. Thank you very much. You
Okay,
take care. Bye, Vic.
I'll end it now. I'll end it now.
Thank you.